coming in first on our timeline is the standard in which all flight sims will be measured and would rarely reach. Falcon 3.0, releasing in 1991, immediately obsoletes all that came before it. With the most complex simulation of a combat aircraft to date, the F-16A, Falcon 3.0 sets the bar and sets it strong. In terms of quality of life updates, this game simply obliterates the competition at the time. It's the first to invent padlock view, which in a combat flight simulator is game-changing. I think this is actually the first game to have a camera that locks onto a target, predating games like Tomb Raider and Zelda by many years. At the time, this concept was so new and groundbreaking that there's even a section in the manual about it. It's extremely useful but can get disorienting without the cockpit lift lines. This will be added in another game later, but for now, the top middle indicators are excellent for what they do. The external camera modes are also highly controllable. You can zoom in and out of yourself, your missile, and your many targets, as well as change the angle, just by using some function keys. The main menu is also really great, and just goes to show you how you can make a flight simulator GUI look fun. Many games of the early flight sim era have something like this. The Jane's games come to mind. Falcon 3.0 has so much to do. There's an instant action mode, a campaign, and even multiplayer dogfights. Oh, you thought I meant just two-player head-to-head versus? No. There's full campaign, and with expansions, you can have, I think, up to 8 players, and it works in DOSBox as well. Here's some footage. I don't know chaff and flare button. Oh, that hit me in the face. I do not know the chaff flare here. Alright,
I get it here again.
Meg took fat L's. Right,
No.
Meg, that's the Meg for you.
Oh no.
There
Dang
we go.
it.
Meg gets the kill finally.
Oh.
Boom! The GUI and music are immediately stunning and recognizable. The sound design is also extremely well done for its time. Even when starting a flight, you are greeted with an amazingly nice startup sound. Not bad for 1991. The MT32 that I'm using in DOSBox is used to its fullest MIDI fidelity. The training missions are also extremely plentiful. There's almost too many, covering every single aspect of the aircraft and missions that you can do. For example, missions for navigation, landing, as well as BFM and BVR scenarios covering each weapon in detail. The way it works is you pick a mission and you cross-reference it with what the manual will tell you to do. And it's a great system, especially for its time. The manual doesn't go too complex at starting you off, and it'll go deep later, but it just wants you to get done what you need to do in the mission. However, some missions are kind of extremely long for no reason, like the graduation air-to-ground training. I think that the real game time to fly this is 30 minutes, just to see if you can drop a few bombs on a nuclear plant. The campaign kind of acts the same way. It's just not fun to fly for 30 minutes to get to a target when the graphics are this minimal and drab. The campaign maps are pretty insane, including the entire country of Panama, I think, to its actual scale, which for 1991 is very impressive. Falcon 3.0 is also the first to have working air-ground radar with multiple modes of zoom. Its radar for a 1991 game without a clickable cockpit is more than serviceable in its fidelity. Here's an example of using the air-to-ground radar to kind of ID the target and get bombs on target with Ripple. Pretty satisfying. There's even sort of a wireframe-like effect when locking up targets with the Maverick. It's very, very retro and very fun. Did I mention that Falcon 3.0 has 2 other aircraft? That's right, expansions to a 1991 game. The first add-on was the MiG-29, an insanely ambitious add-on, which also brings further multiplayer content. Each plane also has its own personality and systems, such as the stealthy infrared search and track of the MiG-29, and even a look-and-shoot spyglass to launch heat seekers. Stalking the enemy and launching heat seekers using the HMS system is great fun. And the final is the F-18 Hornet, bringing carrier operations and multi-MFD functionality. Of all the games in the list coming up, Falcon 3.0 has the highest quality and amount of add-ons. It did it first, and it did it the best. Not even its successor can compare with the sheer amount of content. On paper, Falcon 3 is looking to be the strongest entry here, but this all comes with a massive elephant in the room, I'm sure you can tell. The graphics are extremely low quality, mostly due to its age. It's the oldest one here, but there are times in which the graphics and view to distance is harmful to the player. Missiles and ground targets such as runways and ground vehicles are not really rendered at a good distance, making landmark-based navigation and general situational awareness very difficult. There are times in which you could be headed towards the ground, the entire thing is just the same monotone color, as well as the sky. The audio is also what would be 2, maybe 4 channels max, like if you're shooting and a missile's fired, things like that, certain sounds would be cut off. Falcon 3.0 was truly ahead of its time, but almost in a bad way, where the graphics and audio literally limit the game's fidelity. And it's a shame because the developers' reach greatly outweighed their grasp, and for all the goodies that this game has, the low poly and low render distance really inhibit the game. In other DOS games, it could be a charm, but Falcon 3.0, it's almost a hindrance. It is 1991 though, and at the time, it was probably considered breathtaking. For what it is, Falcon 3.0 is the complete package. It has everything a simmer could want. 1991 pilots were truly spoiled with content when this came out, that is, if their machine could handle it. At the time, Falcon 3.0 was known for just straight up melting computers. You needed to have a math coprocessor, which is like the RTX 4090 of its day. In the 90s, this game stood the test of time. Simmers wrote novels on tactics and strategy, even going to the late 90s until its successor came out. And even then, people stuck with Falcon 3.0 because everything just seamlessly works together with a beautifully crafted user interface for each aspect of the game. The multiplayer and add-ons are top-notch. Trying to determine which tier this game belongs into is probably the most difficult in the entire video. Falcon 3.0 presents itself as a total all-star and really owns everything that it comes out with, but in this day and age, it's simply surpassed by higher fidelity, clickable cockpits, and 3D graphics. Falcon 3.0 is probably the most solid B-tier sim in this list because everything just works, but sometimes the game doesn't even know its own limitations, but that in itself is very impressive. Next is the game Tornado by Digital Integration. It was made in 1993 and simulates only one aircraft, the Panavia Tornado. Whereas Falcon 3 wanted massive maps with a fighter pilot experience, Tornado zooms in, way in, with a highly detailed map that has trees, power lines, railways, and more. The detail is pretty insane for a 1993 game, and Tornado being a simulator of a low-level strike aircraft, the developers knew what exactly to prioritize and enhance. There are 10,000 objects in any one map. And with this game, there's also something that I want to start bringing up when it happens, and that's modability. Tornado's source code came out, and a modder named Frankie went nuts, making something like 300 unique tweaks to the assembly source code, such as increasing the number of objects to 15,000, adding winter and desert themes, different external views, and more. I'm playing with these mods, and for all games going forward, I'll be doing the same because we don't really live in the past anymore, and I also want to use the best possible renditions of the game as they stand today. Well, except for one specific game later on. Okay, back to the game itself. The cockpit is heavily lived in, each dial, meter, and indicator light serving a unique purpose. The Tornado aircraft is swept wing, and you manually control the angle in flight for speed or maneuverability. It's super immersive, especially this close to the ground. What also differentiates Tornado from all the other planes in this video is that Tornado has a switchable backseat cockpit where you can view the entire flight plan, select munitions packages, and change fire modes. While Falcon 3 is all about being a combat fighter pilot at 20,000 feet, Tornado is about the ground strike and mission planning experience at 200 feet, and everything in this game is built around that feeling. Tornado is a game that just throws you into a world and gives you toys to play with. There's so much to do. You have anti-runway bomb pods, which are just so awesome every time to use, cluster and dumb bombs that you could even loft with a countdown timer for each lofting stage, and even laser-guided precision munitions. So cool. Here's the size of the map again. It's so detailed. There's networks of roads, power lines, and hills. The missions are all perfectly bite-sized, and the whole world truly feels like a playground to explore and just blow stuff up. Tornado is all about the planning and execution, and it really shows here in the mission planner. It has an extremely important and detailed waypoint system used to coordinate with your AI allies. Here you can select any of the hundreds of objects on the map, view anti-air and SAM coverage, and also look at the intel that your team has on the enemy and their structures, as well as their supply and even their morale. The autopilot is built around this type of attacks. While in use, you can see the planned time per waypoint and set your altitude to ensure that you stealthily get to your target and get to it in the planned time, especially with coordinating for allies. However, the way that loadouts work is a little strange in this game. You have these 3 slots corresponding to target packages, and you have to use all the bombs allocated to it at once. It's kinda weird. Also, did I mention that there are quasi-dynamic campaigns, kind of akin to what's in Falcon 3.0, but more is included here, such as the dynamic supply lines I was talking about earlier. You can blow stuff up to weaken the enemy. There's also a Desert Storm add-on that is pretty much the same thing, but in the desert, and more focused on oil fields and such. One complaint that I have about the campaign is that it's a little too manual. There isn't a list of missions to choose from, although the world has more going in on it. You never really get that cog in the machine feel like you really should. It's kind of hard to view other packages or even look at and join other missions. I mean, even the descriptions for the Desert Storm campaign say, do it yourself. But hey, they make doing it yourself really fun, and you have complete freedom of choice as what to hit and when to do it. Unlike other games in this series, Tornado is extremely apolitical in its scenarios. The enemy nation is unnamed. I think it's called something like Team Orange, and there's no reasons for the war other than here's some shit to blow up, have fun. Whereas Falcon 3's campaign includes like geopolitical conflicts. They give you an entire like essay before the campaign happens on what's happening, how did it escalate, how do you solve it. Tornado's not like that. It's way more sandboxy. Its map serves no purpose other than a playground to shoot stuff. But this in a way kind of adds to Tornado's charm because Tornado knows exactly what it's made for, and that's just killing shit at the speed of sound at 100 feet high. There doesn't need to be any reason to do that. I've had just so much fun flying around and blowing shit up in Tornado. Here I wanted to see if I can kill this train with the anti-runway bombs, which technically the game doesn't really want you to do. I had to stalk the train with the ground radar and set a point because the bomb won't drop manually. It needs a set waypoint to do it, and I had to time everything just right. And imagine my surprise when it actually worked. And then I go around and finish it off with guns. Boom. No more train at all. Highly satisfying. Again, there's an elephant in the room here, but it's not the graphics this time. It's the resolution, literally. The pixels themselves are limiting the fidelity of what can be rendered and at what distance. This game is so beautiful. I mean, look at this scenery. You have a train with real train tracks loading up to a chemical plant that has like 50 buildings in detail. You have a trench network, you have oil fields, you have factories, power lines. Like, if the resolution wasn't so bad, this game would be so beautiful. It is handcrafted perfectly, like artistic, and I just wish that the resolution wasn't as bad as it is, because this game is really something to see and experience, and I'm happy that it even exists in its current form. Another problem, I guess, would be the lack of padlock view. There's no padlock view, which is kind of strange, because keeping track of missiles, keeping track of your AI, wingman, etc., the built-in views are pretty limiting, so it would be nice to have that as well. Tornado is another entry into many 90s fans' Hall of Fame, and for many reasons. Rarely does a game give you the ultimate playground and ultimate freedom to just choose a target, plan, and execute alongside AI buddies the way that you see fit. This game is hard and punishing, just like Falcon 3.0. You really need to examine the map for threats before you can even try to succeed. But when you do, it is really adrenaline pumping. Figuring out where to rank Tornado is also pretty difficult. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to paddle against all the gobs of features and expansions that Falcon 3.0 has and place Tornado above it in A tier. Even with its limited scope and lack of multiplayer, everything Tornado does, it does well, minus having a padlock view. The gameplay loop in Tornado is so much smaller, but it's just inviting for you to come up with an idea, like, what if I attack from this angle with this payload at this timing and altitude? Or let me choose another target, maybe try to knock out the anti-air, maybe knock out a bridge. Like, the gameplay loop is much smaller, but much stronger as well. Falcon 3.0 is an absolute behemoth of a game, but Tornado's world is much more satisfying to exist in, at least for me, and the game does a magnificent job at showing the world off. I mean, this game is also still getting modded to this day, so try not to crucify me too hard here. Welcome to 1995, the era of 480p and later on, true 3D with 3DFX glide graphics. EF2000, a sequel to the critically acclaimed arcade shooter TFX, comes in strong with a more grounded, serious simulation of the Eurofighter in 1995. EF2000 brings one theater, the Nordic, in a Cold War gone hot, and with it, a dynamic campaign that's unlike anything else of the time. Graphically, it's an era ahead. This game has 3D effects and 3 degrees of freedom head tracking that still works to this day thanks to modders Mike W. and Home Fries. Sorry if I forgot anyone else. Besides Falcon 3.0, EF2000 also has dynamic audio comms such as AWACS, vectoring you to a target or alerting you to enemy movements, and comms with your wingman on when and who to engage. Let's talk enhancements. EF2000 has a quasi-clickable cockpit, in which you enter each MFD view specifically to push buttons on it. The Eurofighter is very modern and fits the new 1995 technology well with its 3 main MFDs and center screen. They're set up in a dedicated attack, navigation, and defense MFD. The Eurofighter also has the infrared search and track screen in the middle, where you can see a projection of the enemy on a center screen right underneath the HUD without radar necessary. The flight model is also way more realistic. There's these crazy inertia effects, so watch out when you're flying too close to the ground. The EF2000 is very enjoyable to fly in this game, and I think it's the most maneuverable plane in the game as well. The number of weapons that you get is pretty standard here, but more than we've seen before. You get 3 types of AA missiles, Dom cluster, laser bombs, Durandal anti-runway bombs, Mavericks that now show a real display of the enemy vehicle, and even some unguided rocket pods. There's also a naval aspect in the form of the Sea Eagle anti-ship missile. Like the Sims before it, the weapons in EF2000 are all pretty easy to learn and to use. EF2000 also has a 3DFX mode using Glide. It scales the resolution to basically be infinite or whatever your monitor can display.
pretty insane, especially for the time, but I actually prefer not to use it due to rendering issues where vehicles and aircraft are pretty much impossible to spot at a distance, as well as not including the cheat sheet view of the MFDs, because in this game you can't see the MFDs while you're flying, you have to look down. I think I'm just too used to the DOS version as well before EF2000 Reloaded came out and enabled it. The view options that EF2000 comes with here are godly. Every single padlock, external view type, flybys, whatever you want, digital image design knows exactly how to provide it, and they really give it all, especially with this action cam. It's a cinematic camera that jumps around the map. You can focus it on friendly or enemy air and ground units, and it really makes the world feel alive in a way that no other sim before has done. Full multiplayer is also back, with head-to-head and up to 8-player campaign. I never tried it myself, but according to the documentation, the host has to set up the campaign and the mission before launching. Seems pretty cool. Now back to the campaign. The sheer size of the map is insane. I'm not sure if it's truly to scale, but yeah, that's the entire Nordic front, including water, which isn't just dead. There exists naval and oil platforms to hit up, and everything gets done in this campaign planner screen. EF2000 introduces mission choice, in which the game really lets you know that there is a world of Eurofighters just running around doing stuff, and you can choose which one you'd like to partake in, even modify the targets and weapons that you want to do it with. The campaign is a little strange though, and it's kind of based on airbase hopping. Like, if you're able to destroy an enemy airbase, you then take it over for yourself. Rinse and repeat that until you win. Obviously, there's a little more to it. You can still destroy factories and such to hurt enemy morale and supply, and there's lots of high-value targets to hit up too in the mid-game, such as enemy AWACS and important naval vessels near Russia. Mission planning here is also super fun, and you can recruit other planes to help you. It's so diverse in the options that you can take, that is, if there are any planes left in the air bases, because the default missions seem to grab them all. Flying the missions takes lots of in-game time, which is why there exists a time skip button. All you have to do is keep spamming Control S until you get to the fun part. But sometimes it throws you into an enemy nest in which it may be too late to escape. I love this system, and I wish that there was another game that came out later that should have had it. The AI is both smart and stupid. Hey, stop firing before the merge! Yeah, that's right. Here's a taste of your own medicine. Yeah, dogfighting is fun, and you really feel stressed out when you're intercepted in like a bombing raid and are down to just guns. EF2000 is very immersive, as you can tell. The indicators on the bottom left of the HUD show damage and turn orange and red when you get hit. It affects different systems, and the damage model is quite good for its time. Bullets tear through your wing, sometimes removing it completely. If that's the case, it's definitely time to bail out. I mean, take a look at these flickering MFDs. If that's not immersive, I don't know what is. If I had a single complaint about the MFDs, it's that there's no way to view them all while flying. There is the MFD display key, but that doesn't work in 3DFX mode, another reason why I don't use it. The lock-on sound is also super annoying after a while, and you can spend an entire mission with the bogey locking you up from 80 nautical miles away the whole time. Please, just let me turn it down. The missile strategy is also very strange. It's very hit or miss, and kind of dependent on baiting the AI to follow you into your missile until it's too late for them. I'm sure someone more knowledgeable about this game can chime in here about the tactics, but for now, I haven't quite figured it out. Another complaint about the campaign is that it's not per se real-time. By this I mean things don't really move on the map, like everything gets calculated at these timed intervals. And it makes me wonder, what does killing the tanks do if the tanks never move? It's kind of akin to the limitations in the Falcon 3 or Tornado campaign, and I wish it just went a little bit further to be a true dynamic campaign legend. Figuring out how to rank EF2000 is very hard. I would put it probably at B tier simply because while I think it's more of an accessible sim compared to Tornado, there's just kind of lots of dead air in the map, and while the dynamic campaign is great, it's a little lacking of actual substance. The gameplay loop just isn't as inventive as Tornado's. It'd be different if the game had more standalone missions like Tornado has, but it seems like did went all in on this dynamic campaign. Other than the campaign, there's not really much to do. The standalone missions are pretty lacking. If EF2000 had a little more something going on in the ground aspect, it would definitely be A tier. I have so many hours on this game, and I've played it all the time in high school, just running campaigns, blowing up runways, pushing closer and closer to the Russian front, but maybe I'm just burnt out with my personal bias, but I would still say EF2000 is a definitive must play, and I would recommend this to anybody getting into the 90s Sims. Next up is F22 Total Air War by Digital Image Design, which built on and enhanced every feature in EF2000, except maybe the dynamic campaign. Like the title says, you fly the F22 Raptor, and there's a little bit of funny, kind of trend-chasey history as to why. At this point in the 90s, new jets like the F-22 and Joint Strike Fighter were getting lots and lots of attention by fans. You had so many companies taking a crack at it at the same time: Novologic's F-22 series, Interactive Magic's IF-22, and Mission Studios' Jet Fighter 3. But the definitive winner is Total Air War, otherwise known as TAW, and it's the only one worth mentioning in this video. There's also some historical controversy about this game. Did first released F-22 Air Dominance Fighter, the previous game to this one, in a rushed state with only static missions and no dynamic campaign. They promised to fix it and add dynamic campaign, but the update would be paid, and almost full price, even for original buyers of ADF. Needless to say, they got a lot of flack for it. But did they deliver? Let's find out. The improvements over EF2000 are vast. The F-22 includes 4 large MFDs in the same kind of display format: attack, navigation, and defense, and the lower MFD is used for systems and fuel status. Infrared search and track is back, but the screen is now multi-purpose, and it can also be used to show the laser designator. The screen on the left shows a detailed damage status. Of course, the EF2000-esque damage model is back, but now with even more detail. Many more systems can be damaged, showing a percentage of their damage, and oftentimes the damage will combine to completely cripple you, especially if a fuel leak or engine fire breaks out. And depending on where you're hit, the systems will continue to degrade, even based on other damages. MFDs can end up flickering or turning off several minutes after the damage has occurred. Fuel leaks, engine fires can get worse and spread throughout the plane. Needless to say, the damage model is insanely detailed, and out of all the flight sims here, I think Total Air War takes the cake for their damage model. The modding scene for this game is pretty neat. Homefries, Mike W., Pollock, Christie, and more contributed to a wonderful launcher and mod collection. They are all extremely passionate for the game, and I will link all their resources in the description. You can change the aspect from cockpit, allowing all MFDs to be shown, change the weather and the clouds, even the paint jobs for the F-22. Of course, head tracking is back, and glide is amazing for this game, and in my opinion, it's the only way to play it. The DirectX resolution is just a little too low, and DG Voodoo is awesome. The smart views and dynamic camera is back in action and just better than ever. Dogfights are extremely fun to spectate, and there's even a special camera angle that kicks in when you're in a dogfight. Even just looking around in the world at moving ground vehicles, planes taxiing, takeoff, intercept, BVR, everything looks beautiful, and TAW's views take the cake over every other sim in this video. It is just so damn beautiful. Did's marketing listed this action camera kind of as a virtual movie director in which you control the action, and the Smart View really showcases it. I 100% agree. I love this system. The dynamic comms got a massive upgrade as well. You can hear comms globally, and the pilots talk kind of in this funny, exaggerated American accent that's quite fitting for the planes and the environment. It greatly adds to the immersion and makes you feel like a cog in the machine. You're also just the ultimate killing machine, and the game wants you to feel it. There's a lot more planes and vehicles this time around as well. Civilian planes, transports, limos, and ground vehicles that move this time, ships and missile boats, and even UFOs in the Independence Day-esque static campaign. These are paratroopers flying out of ships. This is crazy. The ambition of TAW greatly exceeded its grasp. Unfortunately, I don't think these paratroopers do anything, but man, is this world just alive. The loadout is pretty standard again. I think the only additions are the JDAM, which is a fire and forget GPS guided bomb, and some cool cluster munitions. They're all amazingly fun to use, and the sound effects are great. With the F22 comes new electronic warfare, and it's quite interesting to see. There's a system called MCON, which stands for Emissions Control, which you can manage on a scale of 1 to 5 that controls how visible you are on radar to enemies. But the less visible you want to be, the more that you give up, such as auto countermeasures, firing AMRAAMs, and at lower levels, even losing comms completely. It's a neat system, but I find that sometimes the AI cheat. It feels like they know exactly where you are, even if you evade in another direction. Maybe they're using their own infrared search and track, could be possible. The F-22 also has an internal missile bay, which can also assist with stealth operations, opening up new stealth choices during the campaign. Oh, I forgot to mention the coolest thing on the F-22 is thrust vectoring, which is in full use in this game. It's very fun and skillful to use, and can make or break a dogfight. It gives you lots of turn at the great cost of speed and energy. The static missions are exceedingly plentiful and diverse. Assassinate a VIP in a limo, escape from a runway with the anti-air guns blazing, or go on a campaign where you play as both an Egyptian that's stolen F-22 and the government that's fighting their country. Like its predecessor, you cannot customize loadout or waypoints in static missions, and I really wish you could for some of them. However, there's a lot of content here without even touching the dynamic campaign, which is novel, but a little underwhelming. The multiplayer is existent here, but heavily lacking. You can't do multiplayer campaign anymore, only dogfight and static mission, which is okay, I guess, but it's really strange to leave it out when the predecessor had it. Let's talk campaign. First off, why is there a ranking and a grind system for a single-player game, especially in 1998? Like, you have to level up these star rankings in order to do the cool missions. They basically say you have to do the bitch escort missions before you can do any of the cool stuff. It's really weird, but thankfully there's a cheat that turns all that dumb shit off. Who thought that that would be a good idea? There's a lot of intro scenarios for the campaign, which can mix things up, but it's all the same area at the end of the day. The campaigns themselves are very interesting though. The goals are clear, and the command will tell you what targets are valued the highest and how many points they're worth to win. This kind of transparency regarding the inner workings of each object in-game is highly refreshing, as in EF2000 and Tornado we get the hint that killing this building would do something, maybe, but now we know an actual amount. A future game will also heavily struggle with this problem, but Total Air War is the only campaign that actually tells you what to do and what impact killing your targets will have. There's multiple stages of the campaign, all with overarching goals to achieve by a certain time frame. It's pretty cool, and another game on this list will greatly be lacking in this clarity as well. Onto the campaign quality. The missions are kinda long, but thankfully there's a time skip button. Also, these African nations seem to have an endless supply of advanced Su-35s. They actually infinitely spawn as long as there are air bases to field them, and it can be quite annoying, but maybe the developers wanted you to always have things to fight. I enjoy the campaign, but sometimes the amount of damage needed to win can be quite excessive. The campaign locks you into these awful missions in this screen. Like, you have to escort, you can't strike, and you can try to edit them and try to get an F-22 for a strike mission, but it's not guaranteed. And you have to also hope for an AWACS slot to take it over, which is annoying. I don't know why they did it in this fashion, and there should be a lot more freedom in what to do. Speaking of the AWACS, TAW also has an AWACS feature, which is kind of interesting. At any time in the campaign, you can hop in and play Mission Commander by controlling other planes in the campaign in real time or accelerated time. And if the plane is an F-22, you can take it over. It's a fun system, and I like to use it to hop into F-22s and missions that I can't do. You can't make your own missions, which is kind of strange because its predecessor EF2000 allowed building custom missions in the campaign. You also can't really control ground vehicles, nor do the ground vehicles fight each other. Although I do see ground vehicles move, I don't think I've ever seen them fight each other. Wait a second, this mission might have it though. But it's kinda strange. According to Home Fries, ground vehicles do next to nothing in regards to territory control and movement. Total Air War was a game born out of the downfall of the flight sim era. Did's publisher was rushing the product from F22 ADF and even more to TAW, and they had to leave a lot on the cutting room floor both times. But what they have made and delivered is pretty fantastic. As I was reviewing this game, I knew it would be A tier, but I forgot just how much fun this game is to play. Just launching a mission and going into the cinematic views to see all of the action is great, and blowing shit up is insanely fun. If the campaign wasn't so quirky and the ground war just a little more fleshed out, well, more than completely non-existent, this game would easily be up there in S tier. It is just so damn fun, and I really wish that the devs got the time to finish the game. I recommend this game over everything we've seen thus far, flaws and all. Joint Strike Fighter, created by a small, basically indie developer, Interloop Studios, and distributed by Eidos Interactive, is a highly ambitious game based on the two candidates for the F-35, the Boeing X-32 and the Lockheed X-35. Released in 1997, JSF aims to compete with the best, showcasing quasi-dynamic campaigns, a fully clickable cockpit, and a big focus on graphics. I mean, you can even choose 1080p and beyond. In my Nvidia rig, I can make this even 4K. However, anything beyond 1080p and big pixels option, which halves the resolution, will result in crashes. Still, very impressive that this game can even support it. I'm not even sure 1080p was possible in 1997. Graphically, the game was ahead of its time, and the marketing really wanted you to know it. Massive cities, a good view distance, and high frame rates are all very impressive, especially in 1997. They give you both glide and DirectX options, both of which are supported using DG Voodoo, which I am using here. In-game, the first thing that strikes me is the highly limited menu. You either have a dogfight or a campaign option, featuring 4 maps and quasi-dynamic scenarios. There are 0 static missions, training missions, or missions on weapon deployment, which is pretty sink or swim, especially since in the dogfight mode you can die in the first 5 seconds without even knowing what's going on. Granted, this is a pretty arcadey style game, so it's not like I have a ton of stuff to learn, but a sandbox in which I can try stuff out would be pretty appreciated before I dive headfirst into a campaign. Well, this will be a pretty short video otherwise, so let's get into the meat of it. The setup is very similar to Total Air War MFDs, which makes sense given the plane in question. 3 MFDs and a 4th below it. However, there are even 2 more MFDs off to each side. The HUD, however, tends towards the top of the screen, and not the MFDs, but you get a view of the MFD displays in the corners. The MFDs are all pretty simple, and one just quick read of the manual will tell you all you need to know about them. What's interesting is that you cycle air-to-ground targets using this right MFD, choosing between GPS, infrared, or manual deployment of weapons, which in actuality is just different ways to cycle through target types. I think that this is actually the first fully clickable cockpit in 3D, and that is pretty special. I mean, even the joystick and throttle here move with your movements. The cockpit also saves your settings every flight, which is pretty neat. The views are pretty limited, and you can't change the angle or free look. There are a few weapons views that are neat, but that's just about it. But look at the detail on some of these models, like these tanks. Graphically impressive still. In terms of weapons, the choices are pretty limited. You get 2 AA missiles, 2 bomb types, JDAM or cluster, as well as anti-radiation missiles, rockets, and a few JSOs. The rockets are pretty much useless, and I want to say that the JSOs are kind of strange as well. They shoot weirdly, and I can't really get them to do much to the target. The damage model is very simple, and damage is only done to your airframe, not avionics, as far as I know at least, because it seems like things either just bounce off of you or kill you instantly. The campaign is simple. You pick a target and you blow it up from your single starting airbase. You win when you kill them all. The length of the missions can be insanely long because you only have one airbase on one side of the map, and can take you a half hour to reach the other side. Thankfully, there is a time compress button, but it is weird to not have any other airbase of choice, and the quote-unquote dynamic portion isn't really dynamic. It's more like you just destroy targets one by one. There isn't like any supply or morale impact it has on the enemy per se. Think of it like a map where you pick your instant action mission. They give you kind of a little overview of why you need to destroy this, but that's about it. Not really much else to say here. I love the graphics when it comes to cities, but the actual target areas are pretty barren. Like, airports will only have a single radar or a single hangar, maybe a control tower. It's kind of weird how they scatter the detail in the places that don't matter. This game is also highly punishing. I almost always die in one single hit from a missile, and the missiles come at you fast. The tone quickens as they get closer, but you never really get to see any radar lock, nor in which direction the missiles come from. I mean, if you spam chaff and ECM it usually works, but if it doesn't, you're a goner. What's funny is that the bullets are really slow, and so is the rate of fire, so the anti-air is pretty easy to avoid. On a good note, the soundtrack for this game is a banger, and in my opinion perfect for flying missions. Games in the 90s can come on what's called enhanced CDs, where both the game and its soundtrack fit on the same disc, and you could even play the CD songs while in game, and I find that super cool, and definitely a less talked about 90s era innovation. By the way, the games EF2000 and F22 also has it, but both of those soundtracks aren't good at all. JSF is a neat game, and I'm happy that it exists. That being said, I have to put it into D tier. While I love the innovation in the cockpit and the graphics, the game itself is highly lacking, and I honestly find little reason to play it. There has to be a game that comes at the bottom, and believe me, there are many more 90s sims that go into this tier that aren't even worth talking about, so best of the worst isn't too awful a moniker to give JSF, especially for the size of its dev team and the ambition that they had. It's quirky, but at the end of the day, underwhelming, and if there even was a single factor that could be improved, it would go up the list for sure.
We're head to head. He's missed me! He's missed me!
Next up is the game Super Hornet by Digital Integration, a game released in 1999 that wants to give you the ultimate F-18 carrier experience. After Tornado, DI made a few other sims such as Hind, Apache, and F-16, which are all okay but not really worthy of being reviewed, in my opinion. They all follow the same DI format of using the mission planner and some pre-made missions, but I would say that Super Hornet is the most interesting of them all. With the great simulation of the flight deck and its crew, DI's ambition is through the roof, and hopefully by using much of the Tornado source code and the game design of Tornado, they can pull through. Let's find out. Starting with the cockpit of the Hornet is 2D, but it's panable using a mouse or joystick hat. You can click each switch and MFD button, as well as click inside the MFDs to select certain things. To be honest, it's a lovely cockpit to sit in and use. There exists a 3D mode with mouse look, but it's quite ugly and the cockpit isn't clickable. The padlock is pretty neat though. It has this Falcon 3-esque design up top to let you know where exactly to turn, and it's very enjoyable and usable. The views in Super Hornet range from meh to cool. You can cycle through targets and pan and zoom, just like Tornado, but the weapons views are the neatest. Pretty wacky angles here. One thing to note is that the pilot likes to talk to himself about what's happening, and even screams if you are about to crash. It's kinda interesting, and I don't mind this feature. I think it kinda adds to the charm, and sometimes can help with the situational awareness.
Dead ahead. Just a walk in the park. We go. He's coming right at me. 11 o'clock. We're head to head. He's out of here. Sing a rester hook.
However, not all the comms are good. The comms of the carrier crew is very grating, and I'm not a fan of that.
Hornet leader, we are waving you off. Hornet leader, approach.
Check out this carrier ops. It is very impressive, especially for its time, and games like DCS didn't have it until their super carrier expansion. I actually don't know if any other game had this. I mean, despite how primitive Super Hornets is, they did it. No one else did. The damage model is pretty standard here, but one thing to mention is that the plane falls to pieces when you crash, which implies that the 3D model should be broken down by pieces in flight as well, and it seems that way for sure. The model is actually pretty detailed. Gear extends and retracts into internal bays, flaps move up and down, weapons, etc. all look great on the Hornet. But external damage doesn't show otherwise, like if you're damaged, it doesn't affect the model. I will also mention here that the flight model is pretty basic, more basic than F22 it seems, because at least F22 and EF2000 had some sort of inertia effect and external damage indicators. The terrain in Super Hornet is utterly disgusting. Everything is insanely muddy and dark. I can't see anything, and the shading makes no sense. There is direct sun on this terrain, yet it is darker than dark, and the ground vehicles are impossible to make out. Good luck looking at them in this YouTube compression too. I also can't get the gamma settings to work. Maybe that would change something for the better, but I can't figure out how. Maybe it conflicts with DX Wind.
Altitude.
The training missions, however, are simply great. They have a mission for everything that you want to get done, the time taken to do the missions is fast and reasonable, and there's a pretty novel system here when at the end they rate your quality of execution. They rate carrier landings, weapons deployment, launches. They all have this cool little after-action percentage report in which they score how well you did. It's super neat. Multiplayer, unfortunately, is dogfight only, kinda sad. There's also no campaign, just a bunch of static missions, although you have complete freedom on how to tackle them, similar to Tornado. Customize loadout, waypoints, check out the enemy and their status. It's all pretty standard, just like Tornado. Super Hornet was going to have a campaign expansion later on, similar to what they did with Total Air War, but it never came to fruition, as this was the last sim DI ever made, and they went under like the rest. But it is strange how they used lots of Tornado code, but couldn't somehow implement the campaign portion. I mean, this mission planner looks exactly the same, just upscaled, with the Waypoint X system, the pieces on the right, the keys, etc. But I guess one good change is that there is no more weapons packages that you can only use at that waypoint. They got rid of that system. To be honest, I actually like the missions. The world is super alive, akin to Total Air War, and the missions themselves are pretty diverse. Train runs are also back, but the weakness of the game overcame the fun that I was having. The dark textures make it so hard to see anything, and the view angles make it hard to see where things are coming from. It's a shame because the world is super cool, and if anyone knows how to fix the gamma, please let me know. I would really enjoy playing it the way it was meant to be played. In my mind, Super Hornet is the definition of mediocre. While it does try to impress with the insanely detailed carrier ops and cockpit, it ultimately falls flat with, yet again, a lack of what, at this point, should be standard features. Saving it from D tier would be its interesting avionics and neat training features, as well as a more fleshed out mission planner and a view system, so I'll give it C. I mean, I don't know what happened to the flight sim industry by the end of the decade for a lot of features to still be missing, and especially from a company that started out so well a la Tornado. They should know by now how to do everything right, and yet they still kind of fail on it. But I'm not sure if it's like another rust release by the publisher, since DI did want to add a gold edition and a campaign expansion, but unfortunately by that point, it was all over.
Bogey is jinked back into me again. 16 miles, center of the gap, west of our land.
This song is a song that triggers nostalgia in all 90s simmers up to even today. Falcon 4.0, released in late 1998, is the new benchmark for combat flight sims. Like Falcon 3.0, its creator Gilman Louie had the brilliant idea to create a brand new electronic battlefield that would integrate a real-time dynamic campaign on a nationwide scale of Korea. In it, you fly the F-16 and can create, join, and leave any mission at will. Little bit of history, the game was kind of in a development hell starting from its announcement in 1994, but the team at Microprose definitely knew how to advertise. Magazine ads were run 24/7 on the state of the game and its progress. If Microprose couldn't deliver with this, surely the health of the flight sim community, especially nearing the end of the decade, would suffer greatly. Gilman and the team at Microprose had a detailed design document similar to the game Deus Ex, in which they describe in detail the concept of creating the game first, then putting the plane into it. and they surely deliver. Falcon 4.0 gives you the fighter pilot experience and delivers 100%. Almost every feature is present. Dynamic comms, a working ground war complete with infantry, a campaign that gives you full freedom to plan and execute not only your missions, but the missions of every single aircraft in the game, and smart, friendly, and enemy AI that will definitely keep you on your toes. But the game was extremely buggy when it released, and the team at Microprose actually was going under and got bought out by Hasbro, who all but killed future support. As a result, a former employee anonymously leaked the source code and modders went wild. I suggest reading the Falcon epopee linked in description for more information. Ironically, the lack of Hasbro support would be the best thing ever for Falcon 4's long-term future. Let's quickly talk patches, because there are many, and by many I mean probably hundreds. Personally, I'm using what's called Super Pack 4.2. which is the best in terms of modern compatibility while still maintaining the legacy Falcon look and feel. You can notice the UI changes in the menus, so I'll be sticking with Super Pack. It's easy to install, it's one click right after you install Falcon through GOG, so it's just the easiest for me. Let's get into the game itself. As said before, you fly the F-16C in a single theater, Korea. The cockpit is 2D clickable only with a 3D mode, but only for padlock views. The 2D views are cut into these locked set points. You pan around to see each switch and angle using the joystick hat. It's acceptable for the F-16C, especially in this fidelity, and it's kind of similar to Super Hornet's method, minus the lack of free panning. External views are great and work the same as Falcon 3.0. You can view yourself, your wingman. There's even kind of a smart action camera view, but it's definitely not as smart and not as good as what's in Total Air War, at least in my opinion. So it focuses on the wrong things at the wrong time. You don't really get the full action. The weapons are diverse and fun, as well as the systems. Falcon 4.0 is the most in-depth hardcore sim to its date, and everything is built around that. There are so many game options in this menu where you can enable or disable certain realism features, although everyone worth their salt will choose Ace. You have rebindable keys this time, actual graphics options. Like, this game is truly ahead of its time, especially since you can bind any action to any joystick button or key. Falcon 4.0 created this idea of having a sim pit where people had custom MFDs and cockpits made just for this game because of its rebindable buttons. One small complaint is that I wish the binding was more than this little view, but what can you do? I need to comment again on the AI. This AI is top tier, and it makes sense because Microprose had many consultants and a long legacy of a dogfighting focus with Pete Banani as a consultant and his Art of the Kill. You can really get ambushed and die instantly. The ground vehicles even run away from you when you're coming in for a bombing run. They scatter so the bombs don't hit them. Falcon 4.0 makes you keep your eyes open and your head on a swivel. Pairing that with the systems management is a very hard task, but very rewarding too. The world is truly alive, and the number of objects is absolutely insane. From the patch notes alone, I always see, quote, added 23,000 objects, or something to that magnitude. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And each object will affect the campaign, somehow. Well, we will get to that later. I like the world, although it's not as detailed as, say, Tornado, it is much, much larger. I would equate it to Total Air War level of detail in terms of targets, but again, just at this bigger scale. The menu has a lot of options. You have instant action, which is like waves of enemies and a high score system. You have a quick combat head-to-head. You have training missions on takeoff, landing, every single weapon. Again, just like Falcon 3.0, you pick a mission and you can consult in the manual what to do specifically with the avionics, so neat system. There's even a mission builder where you can make any scenario you want from scratch. It uses the same UI as the campaign, making it highly intuitive to switch between the two. Falcon 4.0 also has true multiplayer, from head-to-head to a full campaign. You can join and leave the campaign server at your leisure. The war is always ongoing. The time compression works too. All players basically just have to agree to fast forward at the same time for it to work. I mean, this just goes to show the quality of life that this game has in every single aspect. Alright, now to the true meat, the campaign. Falcon 4.0 only has one region and 3 various campaigns taking place in Korea at different stages. One where you are winning the war, one at a neutral state, and one where you have almost lost and need to push back hard. It's an acceptable amount of options, but especially so when you consider the depth. Multiple air bases fielding multiple aircraft at a scale never really seen before. The way that the campaign works is you have this AI versus AI system, where an AI commander is fielding all missions and commanding all the ground units. You can choose to influence what decisions this AI commander makes using this mission and region priority system, where you can kind of set what you want the AI to prioritize. Or you can just take over entirely and plan every single mission yourself. The choice is yours, and you truly have complete freedom. One complaint about the campaign that's still a complaint to this day, actually, is that I don't know what killing things does. Kind of funny, but they don't really tell you, like what, say, taking out a nuclear plant or maybe this paper factory actually does. What's the difference between the two? What does it impact? I have no idea. Total Air War has this transparency in telling you exactly what it does, but Falcon 4.0 keeps you in the dark, and I don't really know why. Honestly, it's not that big a problem since they have this prioritization system, but still, I always disliked it. Falcon 4.0, even in this stage, is also really glitchy and crashy. It does use ancient direct draw and direct 3D combined in strange ways, and my machine definitely isn't a legacy XP machine, so there's bound to be issues. But that being said, it does crash often during the campaign or give graphical glitches. I basically have it running pretty stable using DXWind. If you want my config, let me know. And I'll also mention that further patches do bring additional stability, but I wanted to be closer to the game's actual release in late '98. Shortly after Falcon 4.0's release, virtually all flight sim companies went under. Digital Image Design got bought out by Infogames/Atari and released a terrible simulator, if you can then call it that, of the Eurofighter in, I believe, 2000. Afterwards, DID became completely defunct. DI/Digital Integration got bought out and ceased to make flight sims entirely. Arcade sim companies like Novalogic ceased development of sims and went to focus on first-person shooters like Delta Force. Actually became pretty successful with it. I mean, it's sad that they all die at the same time, and the same fate occurred to Microprose after Falcon 4.0. I believe that without the source code release, flight sims would be completely dead after the year 2000. I mean, can I even put into words the sheer amount of emotion and love this game has brought to the hardcore flight sim community for decades on end, and it still isn't finished giving. Falcon 4.0 truly is the full package and then some. Its open source nature and complex framework with avionics and campaign has brought it improvements since its inception, from the addition of high-fidelity flight models to now a full 3D, 6 degree of freedom cockpit and complete graphical overhaul. Just take a look at some of the things that BMS is doing nowadays. Would only have been a dream in 1998. Falcon 4.0 is going straight into S tier. The ramifications of this game are felt even today, and games like DCS still struggle to come anywhere near what Falcon 4.0 can do, especially with its dynamic campaign and just overall fighter pilot experience. Falcon 4 makes you realize that it's not just the simulation that matters, but what you can actually do in it, and what you can do to the virtual world around you. We will probably never see again a video game that has the sheer amount of depth and pure gameplay freedom that Falcon 4.0 survives. So, I have to bestow it the highest honor, the one and only S tier. Jane's FA-18 Super Hornet, a game released in 1999, simulates the F-18 Super Hornet in full clickable 3D fidelity. Now, I haven't touched on the Jane series much here, and that's mostly because they're either near impossible to run or too arcadey. But Super Hornet is the last full fidelity Jane's game, and in my opinion, is worth discussing, so I desperately tried to get it working. First off, this game is very difficult to run right. I suggest using D-Draw Compat and playing around with the Shift plus F11 settings, but even then, expect lots of crashing and general glitchiness. I wasn't really able to get multiple campaign missions happening since the menus are using a terrible wombo combo of Ancient Direct Draw and Ancient GDI, and I crash every other mission in the campaign afterwards. That being said, let's get into the game. The 3D cockpit is stunning, and the internal and external views are great. You can pan and zoom with fluidity and much easier than Falcon 4 or DI's Hornet. It's such a fun, high-fidelity cockpit to live in, and the 360 views are great. Padlock also exists in this game, but it's a bit lacking in my opinion. I'd rather use the Super Hornet or the Falcon series system, especially since sometimes this game will lock you on to something unknown or useless. Another minor complaint is the lack of external views globally. It's kind of hard to see what's going on in the game world, but everything else makes up for these shortcomings, and I personally love the flexibility of the views, especially regarding the cockpit. The systems in the cockpit are also very in-depth, and it treads the line close to Falcon 4.0, in which you need to consult the manuals to really understand each system. You also have a great amount of weapons to play with. The 3D models and damage models are really great, and the external damage can break off wings and pieces of your aircraft. Fires can spread around the jet as you continue to take residual damage. It's pretty on par with Total Air War for sure, or maybe even better. The external model is super high fidelity too, probably better than vanilla Falcon 4.0. That being said, the flight model is super weird, in my opinion. The stick seems to have a sort of lag to its input, and speeds kind of make no sense with regards to turn performance and such. Maybe I'm off base here, but it's just how it feels to me. Carrier landings are also super awkward since the jet performs so weirdly at low speeds, and I have trouble with this strange input lag almost. Okay, let's talk about the things that you can do. Jane's F-18 has a strange amount of mission diversity. In the menu itself, you have the standards: instant action, pre-made missions, training, and a campaign. The training missions are laughably easy, to the point in which you learn literally nothing. They're actually not beneficial at all. There are also less than a dozen standalone missions of various quality, and in my opinion, pretty underwhelming. There exists a great instant action mode though, and the enemy AI is very intelligent in both dogfighting and BVR. But where things get interesting is in the campaign system. I wouldn't call this dynamic, as you are presented with only a single mission each time, and you can't really view much regarding the world around you, but apparently your performance does affect future missions. There's also these political videos before each campaign that are super in-depth, almost to a staggering extent. It's an interesting idea. The campaign also has a mission planner, in which you can modify waypoints and customize your loadout. However, the mission planner map randomly freezes my game, and that's a shame because it looks pretty decent, but unfortunately I can't really get into that or speak to it because of the problems that I get. The world seems to be pretty sparse from what I can gather. I can't really globally get an understanding of what's happening due to my mission planner issues, and I guess I don't need to since there's no dynamic campaign here, but it definitely subtracts from that cog in the machine feeling that I really should be getting. Again, it's difficult to spectate external stuff, and the lack of a working action camera subtracts from the world building. Okay, time to rank it, and I'm not exactly sure how to do so. Taking a look at the list, I definitely don't think it's on the level of something like Falcon 3.0, nor does it have a campaign system and in-game world as in-depth as the F2000, but at the flip side, it definitely doesn't have the pitfalls of DI's Super Hornet either. The graphics are better, the cockpit is better, the views are better, the AI, I would say, is also better. That being said, I think the Jane's fans might hate me here, but I'm putting it into C tier, but definitely above DI's Hornet. I hope that at least makes people happy. And when I think of things that make me want to come back to this game, it's mostly surface level, like the quality of life improvements in the cockpit and the top-notch F-18 avionics. Honestly, this game is kind of a sleeper when I first played it. Things flow really nice at a surface level though, but everything else is kind of mid or subpar, and the things that this game does do and offer, other games in this list just do better, especially regarding longevity of the game, so I'm going to keep it in C tier. Bonus game Lightning Round. Fleet Defender is a 1994 game developed by Microprose in which you play as both the pilot and the Rio of the F-14 Tomcat. During development of this game, Spectrum Holobyte absorbed Microprose, making Fleet Defender second chair in production to Falcon 3.0. Thus, it's keeping a much smaller scope and gameplay depth. Fleet Defender thus is air-to-air only, and as the title says, simulates fleet defense in the F-14. Like Tornado, Fleet Defender gives you both seats you can switch to. The game is very simplistic. There's no training missions, but a decent enough instant action mode. The avionics are simple and can be learned quickly from the minimal keybinds. The cockpit is semi-clickable, but most everything is a keybind. The views are decent, and the F-14 is rendered in very high fidelity, especially for its resolution. I like the systems here, and switching back and forth from pilot to Rio is pretty neat, just like in DCS, but of course with less fidelity. The radar works the same way, though, albeit with less options. Turning off the music in the menu is merciful, believe me. My god, is it awful, and the Falcon 3 composer was so good, too. Bring him back. The campaign is similar to Jane's Hornet, in which you have a single mission to accomplish, but the time it takes is so lengthy to get to an intercept, and there's just so much dead air. Contacts can easily be 300 to 400 nautical miles from you, and that's even if they show up. Oftentimes, the campaign tells you to kill a certain aircraft, but doesn't really tell you where it is or how to get to it, making you fail the mission. There are supposedly lots of campaigns, but I can't find them. The manual says there's Korea and Mediterranean, but I only see Nordic, aka Atlantic, and the training theater in the Pacific. There actually is a mission planner here, but I have no clue how to use it. It seems pretty bare bones, though. Fleet Defender is going into D tier probably. It just makes me want to play DCS F-14, and its limited scope and massively long mission times hurt it a lot. The 1990s were a huge period of innovation for PC video games, and flight sims were definitely pushing boundaries. It's a big shame that at the turn of the century, every single company pretty much just ended up dead or moved on, because with the releases of games like Total Air War and Falcon 4.0, it seemed we were just touching the surface of a full electronic battlefield and real-time campaigns. Looking back, it seems to go almost too fast. There are many reasons why flight sims died, from bloated budgets to development hells to the insanely rapid technological changes of the 90s, making devs code themselves into a corner. An example of that would be from EF2000 to Total Air War. Did devs reported that 90% of the code was thrown out from EF2000 due to technical changes. And you can see the same with DI and Tornado to Super Hornet, and how Super Hornet somehow lost features from Tornado, like a proper dynamic campaign and mission builder. I also don't know if this video will start any sort of flame wars or hate, but I will say that every game on here is totally worth playing and is the best of the era. I'm not sure anyone will fully agree with this list, to be honest. That being said, the actual list of 90s flight sims goes into the hundreds, and there's a reason that I'm only talking about these several. They're all each special and contribute something to flight sims as a whole. I try to keep my nostalgia out of it. My favorite game growing up was Novologic's F22 Lightning II, and that game doesn't even merit a discussion here because it is that basic and lame. Anyways, I hope that this retrospective ignites people's passions to re-enter the golden age of the genre and experience playing full games instead of the sterile museum that is DCS.